thanks for joining us this evening. It's great to have you all. Delighted to have Pam with us this evening. Pam's local from South London, and she's going to be talking to you about a variety of different things, including time at school, going to university, career, and all different sorts of things about her own life. And there'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions at the end. And we've got some students who are going to help chair the talk as well. So I'll pass straight over to you, Pam, and thank you in advance.
Thank you very much, Ms. Morrison. Thank you for that lovely introduction. We're going to do this as a little bit like a fireside chat. So Rachel and Fareedah are going to ask me some questions. I'm going to be talking about my experience through education, starting at JAGS, leading up to Cambridge and doing a law degree at Cambridge, and then talking about my experience through the world of work. I'm a corporate lawyer and I work in the city, and I'll explain a little bit more about that. I've been doing that for over 12 years now. I also have some experience working in investment banking as well, which I'll touch upon. But the essence of this talk is exploring themes about identity, feeling comfortable and confident in your own skin. And this takes many guises. It's being confident as a woman, being confident as a Black woman, being confident as a Ghanaian African woman. There's many different facets that I've got to explain and talk about in this evening. So I'll hand over to Rachel, who's going to start off with our first question.
You grew up in South London. What was your journey from there to studying law at Cambridge?
Yes, so I'm a proud South Londoner, absolutely love my part of London. I started life in Oval, right by the Oval cricket ground actually, and I was there with my parents till I was about 6, and then we moved to Crystal Palace. When I was at Crystal Palace, I just went to the local school down the road from me for about 2 years. And towards the end of my second year there, the teacher took my mum to one side and said, you know, we think Pam's really very bright, very capable, but I fear that this school won't push her. And at that point, my mum and dad started to panic. My mum ran home and told my dad what my teacher had said. And because they're typical African parents, typical Ghanaian parents, for them, education is key. Literally, the mantra in our house was education, education, education. And they were very alarmed by the fact that maybe leaving me in this particular school wasn't going to get me the educational attainment that they had in their mind. So they pulled me out of that school, and I went to Sydenham Junior School, Sydenham High School for Girls, the juniors, when I was 8. And then I did the entrance exam for JAGS when I was probably about 11, and I started at JAGS in 1992, which sounds like a very long time ago now. And I finished at JAGS in 1999, which also sounds like a very long time ago, but it's strange because that time's just whizzed past. While I was at JAGS, I absolutely loved it. I found that it was sort of a place where I really flourished, both academically, but also as a person, because I threw myself into the things that gave me joy and that I loved doing. So I loved acting. So I did junior school play, then I was in the main part in senior school play as well a little bit later. And I was in the netball team. I was involved in music lessons, just anything and everything. I'd put my hand up and do it. And I was very much the kind of person who, if I had an interest in something, I would pursue it, regardless of whether I had a friend who wanted to do it or not. I was always very much like, this is something I want to give a go. And I think the school was very encouraging of one being able to be involved in extracurricular activities, all of which I think are good things to increase your confidence. It's great to do a school play, it's great to be on the debating team, it's great to be involved in sports teams, and getting an education at JAGS is very, very privileged in that respect, because not only are you getting a great education, but you're also getting access to all this other extracurricular stuff as well that supports your formal education. And one of the other things I really liked about JAGS, and I think it's quite unique of the schools in Dulwich, is that it's slap bang in the middle of South London, right between Brixton and Peckham. So these areas which are, you know, have a high population of African Caribbean people, lots of people from Asian backgrounds, very multicultural, very ethnically diverse. And the school reflected that, even though it is a fee-paying, you know, what do they call it? Selective school. We in the 1990s still have the benefits of what they call assisted places, which were government-sponsored places for certain private schools. This no longer exists. It was abolished maybe about 20 years ago. But I believe that the schools in the Dulwich Foundation have tried to replicate some of this by having the bursary funds, which allow people who are capable to come to the school regardless of their means and their ability to pay fees, which I think is great because it means that the school is still very rich and very diverse. And I certainly put one of the reasons why I was successful at the school is because I saw girls who looked like me doing well above me. So we had, when I was at JAGS, the head girl was Black. And to me, that was a huge sign that it's a place where you could flourish no matter where you came from and what your background was. It was also nice because the mix of girls was also a reflection of, you know, London as a whole. So it's got a really, really nice diverse mix and reflects the city that we live in. I always used to find that when you come back from summer holidays, for example, I would always have one story of what my summer holidays were like, and there'd often be other stories, and I wouldn't be able to connect with some of the stories that I was hearing. I always spent summer holidays with my cousins. My mum would drop me at one of my aunt's place and then be like, I'll see you when I see you. And we would just spend, you know, the whole holiday in the park, playing on our bikes, running around. We'd maybe have a day out with my aunt somewhere. And it was very much what my childhood was like. My weekends were spent with at some family gathering, some wedding, some christening. It was always the same sort of pattern. It was family, it was culture, it was church sometimes as well, which often played a big part. And it's nice to be able to kind of encounter people that have a similar background to you and share that kind of heritage. When I was in sixth form, one of the things that I did was I put on an African dance and drumming evening. So this probably would have been around 1997, I think, if I remember correctly. And I had connection to a very large, at the time, a large dance and drumming group that no longer exists. But they came into the school, they did a drumming and dance workshop from about 5 to 6 for anybody who wanted to sign up to that. And then in the evening, there was a full dance performance. And then we had food, like a potluck, where everybody brought in food from home. And that was one of the first times that JAGS had done something that sort of representative of sort of African dance and drumming at the school. And I was really, really pleased to have done that. And it went really, really well. Also, and just a short point before we talk about moving on to law and studying law when I got to Cambridge, I studied, in terms of A-levels, when I got to the sixth form, I did quite a mix of subjects. I did history, biology, chemistry, and German. So you got 2 sciences, 1 social science, and then 1 language. And to be honest, I really struggled to pick what to do for my A-levels because I was kind of an all-rounder. So I could have really picked anything. out of the subject that I'd done at GCSEs. And I was unsure about what I was going to do, so I thought I'd keep it broad by that point. And that they're quite, all four of those subjects, quite sort of vigorous, academic, tough subjects. So good grounding, to be honest, for going on to studying law at Cambridge. Hope that answers your first question.
What did it feel like to be such a small minority of Black students at Cambridge?
So when I got up to Cambridge, I was 19 years old. I took a gap year and I worked in London during my gap year. And unlike JAGS, Cambridge was a very, very different environment. And in some respects, I was actually quite naive about what it was going to be like, because I thought that, well, I've thrived at JAGS, which is highly academic environment, privileged in many respects, but very, very mixed, and I felt very comfortable. And I thought that would be what the experience at Cambridge would be like. The mix in terms of ethnicity and race was not good when I got there. So I started in the year 2000, so this is now like 20 years ago, 20 years and some months. Out of, well, let's see, how many people are in the first year? I think the numbers run into about 1,000 and something in the first year, I think, don't quote me on that. But I do know that I was one of 8 Black British students in my first year, starting at Cambridge. Only 8. And it was just a very stark contrast to what I had known growing up. And it felt very isolating. In my first year, it felt very isolating. I have to be honest about that. It wasn't just the fact that we were so small in number and there was nobody who looked like me. It was also the kind of reactions that people had to me and the other sort of 7 students, and the kind of questions that we were asked. So somebody ran up to me one time and said, oh my God, I've never met a Black person before. Do you listen to R&B and hip hop? And I just thought, is that really a question people ask? Like, honestly, really? So it was just sort of that kind of introduction to kind of meeting people who'd never met Black people before, for me, felt very, very jarring and very strange. And it probably took the whole of my first year to get to really kind of get comfortable in that environment. And that's quite unlike me because I'm quite adaptable, but it really took at least 12 months of that first year, from 2000 into the next academic year in 2001, to really get to grips with what I was dealing with, as well as the sort of also just adapting from an A-level, from doing A-levels, which are intense in themselves, to then doing a law degree at Cambridge, which is also super intense. There's a lot of reading to do. There's a new style of working in our tutorials, which is very conversational based and very sort of question and answer based. And so your supervisor will pose questions to you based on the reading that you had done the week before. And you have to answer it on the spot and explain your reasoning and explain your thinking on the spot. So there's no time to go away and think about things, to order your thoughts, to prepare something nicely, type it up and hand it in. It's all done on the spot. And that in itself is a skill. And there's nowhere to hide because our supervisions were 1 supervisor and 3 pupils. So it's a very, very small class. In some subjects, it's actually 1-to-1. So in subjects like English, history, some of the other social sciences, it's just 1-on-1. But in law, they would tend to do it 3-on-1 because it's important to hear other views so that you can take a different stance and almost play devil's advocate. So you're sort of battling with that. A lot of people talk about imposter syndrome. There's a lot of legacy that goes with both Cambridge and Oxford, and you're completely aware of that every single day that you're there. You know that there's, 800 years of history, 800 years of very, very famous names coming out of that university. And so I sometimes felt, oh, I don't know if I'm in the right place. I don't know whether I belong here. I'm not a genius. I'm just a girl who worked very hard and who tries to do her best. And so there was battling with that as well. And what's funny is, interestingly enough, I think by and by, most people at that institution are very smart people who just work very hard. So here's me worrying about it, but it turns out that Gemma down the hallway was worrying about it. Louise was worrying about it. Lee was worrying about it. We were all worried about it, sort of floating around with this anxiety about maybe we shouldn't be here, when really and truly we were all capable and all deserving of a place there. The other thing I found pretty interesting, just coming back to my South London roots, is having lived in London and being exposed to this great international city, multicultural, very ethnically diverse, also really hip, really cool. When I was on my gap year, I would be up in all the big clubs in London. I'd go to great DJ events. We used to sort of bump into like really big name artists all the time in London, like Pharrell Williams, Will Smith, Destiny's Child. It was just so easy to go to sort of things where you had a big name appearing and you were kind of at the forefront of like the music scene, whatever you were into. And I was sort of very much kind of R&B, hip hop, dance hall. And I used to go to lots of events that were in that scene. But then when I moved to Cambridge, it's like small city with 2 clubs, which don't play any of the latest music. It's mostly just all cheesy music. And it also was a bit of a shock in terms of the social scene was just so different from what I'd known in London. And just adjusting to that and trying to find my niche and what I like doing also took some time. And the way that I went about it was, I probably didn't get this right in my first year, to be fair. I probably only got it right in the second year, but a bit like when I was at JAGS, just get involved in things that make my heart sing. So I did another play, and I was in the play at my university in my first year. I was in a play by Brecht called 3 Penny Opera, which was a great experience, great way of meeting other people. I got involved in student politics. So I was on a number of different committees, organising things, campaigning against things, anti-racism campaign, the Black Students campaign. I also got involved in our Mayball Society, which organises a big ball at the end of the year, every year. And that was great because I love organising stuff. So just sort of threw myself into things that I found just interesting. And that way I was, finding things that made me happy, made me smile, also made me meet other people and then find common ground with other people who also shared similar interests. And I think that's one of the key things about creating relationships with people that are different from you, is finding the common ground that ties you together. That's a very, very powerful thing and something that you can use in so many different aspects of your life. And then on the flip side of that, just finding my tribe, as I like to call it. So I did have those girls who were also from London, who were also either Ghanaian, Nigerian, or from the Caribbean. I had tons of friends from Trinidad, Grenada, Jamaica, we were all at Cambridge together on different years, and we supported each other. We became a network that supported each other. And because we have similar backgrounds, we were able to kind of vibe and relate to each other and talk to each other about the experiences that we were having in that institution, and support each other through things that were difficult, but also things that were great. And some of those people are still my friends to this day, 20 years later. So, you know, really, really strong bonds built there. Just to finish off this section on Cambridge, I was in a documentary in 2004 that was filmed by the BBC, and it aired on BBC Two. So we're talking about 16 and a half years ago now. It was called Black Ambition, and it was about myself and 7 other Black students at Cambridge and what our experience had been like studying at Cambridge. Great experience to be involved in that. Really, really kind of one in a once in a lifetime type experience. And this is all before reality TV blew up, and you know, everybody's being filmed and followed with a camera. Great experience, really, really loved being part of that. Nice that that legacy of my time at Cambridge is kind of more immortalized in some way in that documentary, and something that I can look back on fondly. Happy to move on.
You have 15 years experience of working in the city. Now, can you tell us what that experience has been like, both in investment banking and in law firms? Yeah,
sure. So I've spent time in 3 investment banks. The longest I spent was 2 years at UBS, which is a Swiss bank. And I've also spent around 5 years at 2 different law firms. And the law firms is where I really kicked off my law career. When I first got to the city in 2005, I had been in lots of different sort of office environments because I had worked at every Christmas holiday, every long summer holiday I'd worked since I was about 16, just doing sort of temping roles. So I was kind of used to a corporate culture, but I think going into an investment bank, going into a law firm is almost like the height of kind of the corporate world in terms of the way things are, the speed at which you turn over deals, the intensity with which you work, the kind of people that you're surrounded by. They're all very, very smart, all very, very driven. The kind of things that you work on, and you know, you'd open up the FT and the deal that you had worked on would be on the front page or on the second page, very sort of high profile stuff. It's a very competitive environment, and in some ways my education up until that point had been preparing me for this, because you've got JAGS, which is in itself is a competitive academic environment, and you move to Cambridge, which is again a very competitive, pressurized environment, which you're, you know, sort of trying to give your best at all times and really kind of stretch your academic kind of muscles. And then you land in the world of work, and you join a law firm, and it's much of the same. But the difference is it's not only just applying what you've learned in your degree or your law school or in your training, it's about marrying all of that knowledge with softer skills and people skills in order to be successful in that environment. And that in itself is an education, because it involves you sort of switching modes slightly. Yes, you've had all the education. Yes, you've got great grades. You've had, you've done really well. But now you're working in an environment where you've got to adjust to people's idiosyncrasies, their egos, people's bias, whether it's a positive bias or a negative bias, office politics. It really is a learning curve, and a steep learning curve. And much like my Cambridge experience, a very non-diverse world again. Law firms I found slightly worse in terms of diversity than investment banks. Corporate law firms tend to be very male, very pale, and very stale. So it's a lot of white men who tend to be, 40, 50, 60 years of age, not a very young, diverse, either by gender or even by race, environment. And also, can I just add in one other thing? Very cisgender, heterosexual heavy as well. So not a lot of diversity on display. And this is something that once I had been in the game for a little bit, and I had been a lawyer for about 3 years or so, I started to throw myself into doing a lot more work on gender representation and also ethnic minority representation. And the story is the same across most corporate law firms. You see a lot of women coming in at the beginning stages, so sort of the graduate level, graduate entry level. It's about 50-50 male to female. And then if you can imagine a ladder or a pyramid is probably a better analogy, a pyramid to the top. So the top is sort of making partner or making counsel within maybe like 12 to 13 or 14 years of your career. Women all start to tailor off. And all it is at the top is just men. The proportion of female partners, I think, is around 25% or so, when it should really, in an ideal world where everything is equal, be 50-50. Again, if you look at the race story as well, in that context, you see a very similar trend. So the entry level at the bottom of the pyramid, you see a much broader mix of races and backgrounds. And then as you start to rise up the corporate ladder, all of those people peter off again. And you need to examine the reasons why that's happening. And it's a multifaceted issue, but there's definitely some sort of problem in the city with retention and promotion of both women and minorities. And then if you're both a woman and a minority, as I am, then you see even more disparity. And it's funny because just this week, I think the topic of racism is extremely sensitive and also being highlighted so much in our world, because we are all now talking about this issue about Meghan Markle and the racism that she's faced at the hands of both the press and the royal family. And it's funny because a lot of what I'm hearing in my circles, and these are women that have been at JAGS with me, women who have been at Cambridge with me, is that we see a lot of what Meghan complains about, or what people have picked up on the treatment of Meghan, being repeated or being reflected in our own lives. So it ranges from microaggressions all the way through to macroaggressions, some of which are subtle, some of which are covert, to the more overt and in your face macroaggressions. And it's something that with my colleagues, we are trying to work around and trying to prevent, trying to increase people's awareness about unconscious bias, about the underlying assumptions about people, and how that impacts how they treat people in terms of when they're managers and they're managing a minority female worker. How are they assessing that person? What assumptions are they going into once they sort of are faced with this person? And how are they working to overcome those assumptions and overcome that bias? And then on the flip side, I run a mentoring scheme with one of my colleagues, and we pair up young lawyers from an ethnic and black background with more senior lawyers, so they can get help and training on how to kind of navigate their careers, navigate law firms, get sort of specialist training, seek out specialist training to develop their skills, their softer skills. Like I said, this is all sort of, it's all a function of kind of using those softer skills and your people skills to kind of make you more successful in the work environment. So hopefully with that mentor-mentee relationship that we help to set up, we're giving people the tools in order to be successful in environments like law firms, which tend to be very, very kind of homogenous in terms of race and also in terms of gender. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I wanted to say about that. Oh yes, one other thing. After a few years of learning your trade, so for me, it was training as a lawyer and then learning more about the specific area of law that I chose to specialize in. So I'm what you call a projects finance lawyer. So I work on large scale projects in the energy sector with a very specific focus on African projects. So I will be helping to negotiate a power plant that we're looking at in Nigeria or Ghana or Kenya or Mozambique. I have done airports, I've done roads, bridges, power plants of different descriptions. I've also done hotels, but that was rather random. And it's very sort of a niche, very niche area of law. So I would say that like the first 5-6 years of my career are all about learning as much as I possibly could. And it's competence that breeds confidence. So when you're competent in something and you're good at something, you're good at your job, you know how to do things, you know the sector very well, you know how to do all the technical drafting, you become confident in that thing. And that is what allows you to be able to sit in front of a room full of men who are much older than you and hold the whole room, the attention of the whole room, and have people listen to you. So if there's something that I can say to the audience today, it is you need to be good at what you do in order to be able to be confident in that thing and to be able to then push further with the things that you want to do. So I can't stress enough just the foundation of learning your craft and learning it really well and trying to do the best that you can. One of the other things that I became much au fait with once I had been in the profession for a while was then bringing my true self to work. After a while, it becomes very, very tiring if you are constantly pretending to be somebody else or fitting into somebody else's mold of what they think a lawyer looks like or what they think a lawyer is. And it's much more of a satisfying job and a satisfying career once you can be yourself. And so after a few years, I decided that when I came in on a Monday, I actually really did want to tell people what I'd been up to at the weekend. And, you know, if I had been to, for example, if I'd been to Notting Hill Carnival, and I've been going to Notting Hill Carnival since I was 13 years old, so a long time. On that weekend, that last weekend in August, when Notting Hill Carnival is on, I will spend that whole entire weekend going to different carnival events, and it is the highlight of my summer. I want to be able to go into work after that weekend and be able to say and talk to people and explain why I like carnival and why it's important to me as a member of the African Caribbean community in London, and why I've been going since I was 13. And one year I was even in the parade and I had a full costume. And I think it's important to, one, be able to be who you are and to be able to express who you are and what your true essence is, and what, the way that your culture influences who you are as a person. But also, I feel that it's part of a very important cultural exchange, which other people can learn about other cultural experiences of their colleagues that, they're sharing an office with. And I think that's very, very important. I've rabbited on there. Should we move on to the next question?
You speak about leaning into who you are and using your identity as an advantage in your career. Can you expand on that?
Absolutely. So I was very lucky to be at the same law firm as one of my cousins. And I don't know why, but I just have about 4 cousins who are all lawyers, and we're all in the same sort of niche law practice as well, which is really interesting. So we all kind of do project finance work in different companies, but because it's a niche area, we tend to cross paths quite a lot. So this particular cousin and I sat down, we talked about what career path I was going to take and what specialism I was going to go into when I had finished my first 2 years of training. And he and I talked about the fact that Africa was becoming a really exciting continent in terms of energy and infrastructure work, and that it would be a really, really good idea to pursue that as a specialism, because it means that, number one, I can actually completely rely on who I am as a person in order to make a case for more client exposure. So if you're dealing with Nigerian clients, you're dealing with Ghanaian clients, who's the best person in the team to put in front of them? Naturally, the person who's also West African. And this actually played out in practice, and I'll come to that in a minute. But also too, because the African continent is becoming really exciting, kind of the one last continent in the world that hasn't been completely, it's still got a lot of development, let's say. That's the best way of putting it. There's still a lot of development that can happen in the continent. And it's one of the youngest continents in terms of its population. So there's a lot of promise there. And that still is the case today, but we were having this conversation probably like 12 years ago. So I thought it was a natural choice for me to pursue a project finance career and to specifically try and make sure that I worked on Africa deals only. And I was on a deal in Nigeria, and I spent a week in Lagos as part of this deal with the client. The client is it's a Nigerian-owned business, and it's an very famous oil business, and they have both a downstream and an upstream business. So upstream means actually taking the oil out of the ground, and downstream is when you're actually delivering oil to end users. So in this case, they have petrol stations all over Nigeria, and the end product is that oil which has been refined and is able to be used in cars. The CEO, all of the C-suite executives are all Nigerian. Most of the workers in that particular office were all Nigerian. And so I come along and I'm accompanied by an associate who is white British. And I'm pulled aside by the CEO, and he says, we're so glad to see you here. It's so nice to see an African on our legal team, because every other law firm turns up here and no one looks like you or me. And that's an example of how you can form a relationship very, very quickly based on common ground, common backgrounds, and relate to your clients instinctively. just by virtue of being from a very similar background or same background. And in the world of sort of service provision, being able to form a relationship with a client is very, very important. And a team that is diverse, a legal team that is diverse and is seeking to provide legal services to a client is much better placed when the client can really identify with the people in the team. And that held true in our example that I just highlighted. And I've got other, I can tell you about other examples as well. But part of what I love doing in this niche area that I work in is traveling to different African countries. My work has taken me to Zimbabwe, Kenya, Rwanda, where I lived for a little while, Ghana, Nigeria. I've traveled all over really, which has been really nice because I've been able to explore other regions of Africa through work, get to know other regions. The people are so lovely. It's always so fun working with these people. They give me so much jokes, just little insider jokes that only I understand because it's a cultural thing. It gives me a lot of joy and a lot of satisfaction to be working in this part of the world. So in that respect, I really leaned into who I was and my background in order to make this an asset to my career. And it's worked really, really well. One other example is one of my very, very best friends who I was at Cambridge with. She's from the island of Grenada in the Caribbean, and she's in a law firm. And she has also leaned into who she is in a very, very authentic way. So she has these beautiful long dreads, which are just gorgeous. Her accent is still very much a very thick Grenadian accent. She's just been promoted to partner at a law firm in the city. And she is also building up a very, very credible Caribbean practice in dispute resolution. Which has been very, very well sought after by the law firm that she's at, in terms of it's a new market, it's one that they can expand. It's also, again, quite a niche area. So, it's quite specific. Not a lot of people do dispute resolution in the Caribbean in the same way. So they've got this unique selling point by having her business, by having her practice at their law firm. And again, I think it's another example of where somebody has leaned into who they are and used their background as a true asset to their career. Should we move on to the next question?
Yep. Your career has taken you to other countries to live and work, and you've lived in both New York and Rwanda. What did you learn about yourself and the experience of living in these places?
So I lived in New York with my first law firm, and that was an amazing experience, absolutely amazing. I thought I was like literally a character from Suits or something. That's how I was carrying on every day. Absolutely amazing experience. Hard work though, really, really long hours. I would often finish at like midnight, 1 a.m. So it was very intense. But what a city to live in. Absolutely amazing. There's a real go-getting kind of environment and energy in New York, which I absolutely loved. And one of the things that I really liked at the law firm that I was at was that there were lots of senior Black women who were in really important positions of power within the firm, and that was very encouraging to see that, to look above at sort of the trajectory of certain Black women in the firm and see that they had done great things. Very, very encouraging, and cannot be underestimated. There is this saying that people that's quite common at the moment, that representation matters. And it really does. If you can see someone who looks like you can see that they have made it and they have progressed and they've got that promotion and they're head of a team, it's really very encouraging to you as a junior lawyer to know that it's possible. And that's what New York did for me. I think it was a place where ambitions were, people chased after their ambitions, they pushed for them. It kind of reminded me a little bit of when I was a bit younger and I was back at JAGS and we were told that there's nothing that we couldn't do. That's the kind of feeling that I got from working in New York. When I was in Rwanda, so I was in Rwanda more recently, I lived there in 2015, all the way through the summer in 2016. And I was working as a lawyer there on energy projects. And I was in a team of 2 lawyers and then 2 finance advisors, all of whom were either from the UK or from the United States. And then the rest of the team that we supported were Rwandan citizens. Rwanda's pretty much fairly similar to a lot of African countries in that it's pretty patriarchal. And if you are a woman who is not married with no children, it's very difficult to have men listen to you and take you seriously. It's really difficult. And there were often situations where I would have a room full of ministers and permanent secretaries and sort of technocrats and officials from various ministries in the government of Rwanda. And I would have to explain to them complex legal concepts and why we were taking a certain stance on things and have them agree with me. And this in itself was not an easy feat. But again, it comes to what I said before about the competence and the confidence. Just sort of owning what you're saying, owning your experience and your knowledge from everything that I'd learned in my career to that point, and just being able to speak with conviction. I have to say that was something that really kind of, again, steep learning curve, but a really good position to be in, to be able to put myself in sort of an experience or a circumstance where I had to really kind of push against both preconceptions about my age and preconceptions about my gender. And the final question.
What advice would you give to young Black women taking their first steps into the world outside the safety blanket of school?
I'm just going to come back to what I've said already twice, I think. Work hard and make sure that you are the best at what you do. I think that cannot be underestimated enough. But I also think that what I like about the generation coming up now is that you're so much more fearless than I think we were, and you demand a lot more. I think that the younger generations are not going to take microaggressions, they're not going to allow it. I think you're fighting for a lot more equality, which I really, really like. I think you're also fighting for a greater work-life balance, which I think probably generation ahead of me and my generation have probably accepted quite a lot of demands on our time as sort of young professionals without ever pushing back. And I don't think that the next generation will do that. And I think that I'm seeing a lot more people being very authentic, as I've sort of said over this past 50 minutes, about leaning into who they really are. And I think that's great. And I think that you just need to be confident in who you are, sit comfortably in who you are, and bring that to the table, because in any environment where you are not bringing your full self to the table means that that environment is missing some of that color and some of that passion that you can bring and make things a lot more diverse in thought, diverse in experience, diverse in outlook. And I think that leads to better organisations, better thinking and better results. Yeah, so are we going to throw open to more questions?
Yeah, thank you so much, Pam, for those thoughts. We have got one first question, and it refers back to your decision to study law. What was it that got you excited about it in the first place?
Oh, yes. Yeah, absolutely. So I had done these, I had these A-levels, which are kind of a spread across a couple of different types of studying, I guess. So I had the sciences, which is sort of conceptual learning, and then I had history, which requires, you know, to read a lot of information and then carve out a coherent argument, usually done through very, very lengthy essays. And I thought, as I was kind of thinking about degrees to do and a direction to go in, I thought all of the skills that I had amassed from doing those A-levels would work really well for a law degree and also for a law profession. And I had all this drama experience as well. So initially I thought I was going to be a barrister. I thought I was going to take the barrister route and stand up in court and do all this kind of, you can't handle the truth kind of stuff. But no, I ended up becoming a solicitor. So I don't appear in court and I don't stand in front of judges and I don't deliver arguments. However, all of the public speaking and all the acting that I did when I was younger and in my early 20s has been really instrumental in this career in any case. So kind of marrying all of those skills and kind of all of those competencies that I had sort of been building for, you know, a few years at school and in A-levels lent itself really nicely to kind of picking law as a subject. At the time, I wasn't sure whether I was going to go sort of corporate commercial route. When I was 18, I didn't necessarily have that in mind at the time, or whether I was going to sort of do human rights and kind of more social justice route. Once I'd got to Cambridge, if I'm truly honest, we get courted quite early on by a lot of the big law firms sort of offering the kind of corporate commercial pathway, and that kind of just appealed to me. And I thought, right, okay, this is something that might lead to a career that involves kind of lots of international travel, lots of working at the cutting edge of like really exciting deals. I think that sounds great. And so I pursued that path. I probably made the decision that I was going to go down the sort of corporate commercial route by about my second year.
Thank you, Pam, for that. I think Fareedah's going to conclude the meeting this evening.
Yeah, thank you, Pam, for coming, and thanks to everyone for coming. And I hope that was really informational and that was really helpful for me to listen to as well.
Many thanks. Thanks so much for inviting me.
If you've enjoyed this evening's talk, we have more coming up, and your teachers might share information. There's one coming up about engineering, if you're interested in that, in a few weeks' time. So please do look out for the information on that, or you can always look on the SSLP website, which is really informative. Thank you again, Pam. It's been great to hear from you and great to chat to you as well, and learning about all your stories and some really insightful advice there. I think we can all take on board so many of the things that you've shared with us this evening. Thank you very much. And thanks to Rachel and Fareedah as well for asking the questions.